I'm Claire Morgan. I'm 30 years old. And 3 weeks ago, my parents rented out a private room at one of the most expensive restaurants in Seattle just to publicly disown me in front of our entire family. 51 relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, a pianist playing softly in the background. I walked in thinking it was a surprise birthday dinner. I walked out realizing it had been a trial all along. But here's what my parents didn't know. They weren't the only ones who came prepared that night. And the woman sitting quietly near the back, the one no one had acknowledged when I walked in, she had been waiting for this moment longer than I had been alive. Before I take you back to that night, do me a quick favor. If stories like this pull you in, if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, go ahead and hit subscribe to Women Reddit Stories right now so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the call that started everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was halfway through frosting a 3-tier wedding cake when my phone started vibrating across the stainless steel counter. The bakery smelled like vanilla and buttercream, warm and familiar, the kind of place that usually made me feel grounded. I almost ignored it. Orders had been piling up all week, and I didn't have time for distractions. But then I glanced at the screen and saw the name. Mom. My mother didn't call. She sent short, efficient texts that felt more like reminders than conversations. Call your aunt. Send the receipt. Don't forget Sunday. So when her name lit up my phone, something in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't explain. I wiped my hands on my apron, leaving streaks of icing behind, and answered. Claire. Her voice was smooth, almost warm, like honey poured over something sharp. That was the first warning sign, though I didn't recognize it yet. I hope I'm not interrupting your little business. I glanced at the cake in front of me, at the hours of work sitting half-finished. I'm working, Mom. What's going on? Well, she said slowly, like she was choosing each word with care, your father and I have been talking. We think it's time we did something special for your 30th birthday. I actually laughed, a small, confused sound that slipped out before I could stop it. In 30 years, my birthday had never been a priority to her. Most years, it passed with a brief text if I was lucky. On my 26th, she forgot entirely. Something special? I repeated, not sure I'd heard her correctly. A family dinner, she said. At the older room. Saturday night. 7 o'clock. Everyone will be there. The older room. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. That wasn't just any restaurant. That was where my parents hosted celebrations that mattered. My older brother Daniel's law school graduation. My cousin's engagement dinner. Milestones. Achievements. People they were proud of. For my birthday? I asked quietly. The whole family wants to see you, she said, her tone sharpening just enough to remind me who I was talking to. Don't be late. The line went dead before I could say anything else. I stood there in the bakery, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence on the other end. Around me, mixers hummed, ovens beeped, someone laughed from the front counter, but it all felt distant, like I was standing underwater. Something about that call didn't sit right. It wasn't just the sudden interest in my birthday. It was the way she said it. Controlled. Intentional. Like she was setting something in motion. But hope is a stubborn thing. It crept in anyway, quiet and dangerous. Maybe they'd changed. Maybe this was their way of reaching out. Maybe, for once, I wouldn't be the afterthought. I should have known better. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at the bakery. He never came by. Not once in the 4 years since I'd opened the place. But there he was, standing near the display case in his tailored suit, looking completely out of place among the cupcakes and birthday cakes. Nice setup, he said, glancing around. It didn't sound like a compliment. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. He picked up a cookie from the counter, turned it over in his hand like he was inspecting it, then set it back down without taking a bite. "We need to talk about the lake house." There it was. Straight to the point. "It's not for sale," I said immediately. He sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. "Claire, it's just sitting there. You go, what, a couple times a year. Meanwhile, I'm juggling mortgage payments, student loans, everything. It doesn't make sense." "It was Grandma's," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She left it to me." "Grandma's gone," he replied, his tone flattening. "She doesn't need it anymore. The family does." The family. I let out a slow breath and set my piping bag down carefully. It's not just a house to me. It's where she taught me how to bake. It's where... God, Claire, he cut in, shaking his head. "You're always so sentimental. That's exactly why Mom and Dad worry about you." My chest tightened. "Worry about me?" He hesitated for half a second, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You'll see what I mean at dinner. Just, come prepared, okay?" Prepared for what? But he was already heading toward the door. "Saturday," he said over his shoulder. "Don't embarrass yourself." The bell above the door chimed as it closed behind him, leaving me standing there with a sinking feeling I couldn't shake. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing his words. "Come prepared. Don't embarrass yourself. The family does." It wasn't just dinner. It couldn't be. The next morning, things got worse. I woke up to 3 missed calls and a string of texts from numbers I didn't immediately recognize. Cousins I barely spoke to. An aunt from out of state. "Heard you're finally doing the right thing. So proud of you for putting family first. You're making Grandma proud." I sat up in bed, my heart racing as I read through them again. Doing the right thing? About what? Then my phone rang again. Dad. I stared at his name for a long moment before answering. "Claire." His voice was cold, clipped, exactly how I remembered it. "Your mother tells me you're being difficult about the lake house." I closed my eyes. "It's not about being difficult. It's mine. Everything you have is because of this family," he said sharply. "We supported you when you decided not to pursue a real career. We tolerated this bakery of yours even when it reflected poorly on us. And now, when your brother needs help, you refuse?" "It's not my responsibility to fix Daniel's finances," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "Wills can be challenged," he replied, his tone dropping, deliberate and heavy. "And loyalty to family shouldn't have to be." The thread hung there between us, unspoken but clear. "If you care about this family at all," he continued, "you'll come to dinner and make the right decision." "And if I don't?" There was a pause. Then we'll know exactly where you stand." The line went dead. I sat there in the silence, my phone still in my hand, my thoughts racing. If I gave in, I'd lose the last piece of my grandmother. If I didn't, I might lose them. But a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered something I wasn't ready to face yet. "Have you ever really had them?" The night before the dinner, I pulled a dress out of the back of my closet. Soft navy silk, simple but elegant. My grandmother had given it to me for my 25th birthday, pressing it into my hands with a smile. "For when you need to remember who you are," she'd said. I hadn't worn it since her funeral. I laid it across my bed and stared at it, trying to convince myself that tomorrow would be fine. That this was just a dinner. That my family wouldn't go out of their way to hurt me. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened the message. "Don't go tomorrow. It's not what you think." My stomach dropped. "Who is this?" I typed back immediately. The typing bubble appeared. Then it disappeared. No response. I tried calling the number. It went straight to voicemail. I sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, my pulse racing. A prank? A mistake? Or a warning? My eyes drifted to the small wooden box on my nightstand. My grandmother's box. The one she'd left me along with the house. I hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt heavy. Like whatever was inside would change things in a way I couldn't undo. Slowly, I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the worn wood. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the quiet of my apartment, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Then I lifted the lid. Inside the box was a folded letter and an old photograph. The letter was sealed, my name written across the front in my grandmother's familiar looping handwriting. Claire. Just seeing it made something tighten in my chest, like a thread being pulled too fast. Beneath it was the photograph, slightly yellowed at the edges, the kind that had been handled too many times. I picked up the photo first. Two women stood side by side on what looked like the deck of the lake house, the water stretching out behind them in soft blue waves. One of them was unmistakable. My mother, decades younger, her posture already sharp, her smile already practiced. But the woman next to her. I didn't recognize her. She had the same eyes as my grandmother. Softer, though. Kinder. Her arm was looped casually through my mother's, but something about the way my mother was standing felt off. Like even then, she wasn't fully relaxed. Like she was already holding something back. I turned the photo over. There was nothing written on the back. A strange unease settled in my stomach. Who was she? I reached for the letter next, my fingers hesitating just before breaking the seal. For a second, I thought about putting it back, pretending I hadn't opened the box at all. Because once I read it, whatever was inside would be real. Permanent. But I couldn't ignore everything that had been happening. The calls. The pressure. The warning text. So I unfolded the letter. My dearest Claire. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to protect you the way I wish I could have. And knowing your parents, it also means they've already started trying to take something from you. My breath caught. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed, the letter trembling slightly in my hands as I kept reading. Your mother has always believed that love is something to be earned, controlled, and, when necessary, taken. I tried to teach her differently, but some lessons never reach the heart. A chill ran down my spine. 10 years ago, she tried to convince me to sell the lake house. Said it was too much for me, that I didn't need it anymore. When I refused, she became distant. You probably noticed. Fewer visits. Shorter calls. That wasn't by accident. My chest tightened as memories surfaced. Holidays where my grandmother wasn't invited. Phone calls that ended too quickly. I'd thought it was just time, distance, life pulling people apart. It wasn't. I knew then that she would try again one day, and that when she did, she wouldn't come directly. She would use pressure. Family. Guilt. Anything that made you question yourself. My eyes blurred for a moment, but I blinked the tears away and kept going. If you are reading this before a family gathering, then things have gone exactly as I feared. Claire, listen to me carefully. You are not selfish for holding on to what is yours. You are not wrong for wanting to keep a place that holds your memories, your peace, your identity. I pressed the letter closer, my breathing uneven now. The lake house is not just property. It is proof that you were loved exactly as you are. A tear slipped down my cheek, landing softly on the paper. But I've left you more than just the house. My fingers tightened. There is someone else who knows the truth about your mother. Someone I trust to help you when the time comes. Her name is Margaret. She is the woman in the photograph enclosed. Your mother hasn't spoken her name in over 20 years. My heart started pounding. Margaret. Who was she? Where would I even find her? If she is there, you will recognize her. And if she has come, it means she believes you're ready. I swallowed hard, my gaze drifting back to the photograph sitting on my bed. The woman beside my mother. Margaret. Trust her, Claire. She has been waiting a long time to tell the truth. My hands were shaking now. I finished the letter in silence. No matter what happens, remember this, you do not need their approval to be worthy. You never did. All my love, always. Grandma. The room felt too quiet after I finished reading. I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, the photograph beside me, my thoughts spinning faster than I could keep up with. Margaret. A woman my mother had erased. A woman my grandmother trusted. A woman who might show up tomorrow. And suddenly, that message from the unknown number didn't feel like a prank anymore. Don't go tomorrow. It's not what you think. I looked down at the letter again, rereading the lines that stood out the most. They will use pressure. Family. Guilt. A slow, heavy realization settled in my chest. This dinner wasn't about celebrating me. It was about something else entirely. Something planned. Something deliberate. I should have stayed home. I should have listened to the warning, locked my door, turned off my phone, and pretended none of this was happening. But I didn't. Because a part of me still needed to see it for myself. Still needed confirmation that the family I'd spent my entire life trying to hold on to wasn't really there at all. The next evening came faster than I was ready for. The altar room looked different at night. The soft golden lighting, the quiet hum of conversation, the clink of silverware against porcelain, everything about it felt polished, controlled, expensive. The kind of place where nothing happened by accident. I stood outside for a moment, staring at the entrance, my reflection faintly visible in the glass. The navy dress fit perfectly, just like it had years ago. For a second, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. For when you need to remember who you are. I took a breath and stepped inside. The hostess smiled the second I gave my name. Yes. The Morgan party. Right this way. Morgan party. Not birthday dinner. That was the first thing I noticed. She led me through the main dining area, past tables filled with quiet conversations and half-finished wine glasses, toward a set of double doors at the back. The further we walked, the quieter it became. My heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing just a little too loudly. Your private room, she said, placing her hand on the door. Private room. Something in my chest tightened. Then she opened it. And everything stopped. 51 faces turned toward me at once. I froze in the doorway. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Some I recognized immediately, others I hadn't seen since I was a kid. People from different states. Different parts of my life. All gathered in one place. All staring at me. The room was arranged in a wide U shape, a long table stretching around the space, every seat filled except one. At the center. Facing everyone. Waiting for me. There were no balloons. No decorations. No cake. No sign of a celebration at all. Just silence. Heavy, expectant silence. My eyes moved slowly across the room until they landed on my parents. My mother sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression calm in that way that meant she was completely in control. My father sat beside her, his face unreadable, like he was observing something instead of participating in it. Daniel was there too, sitting just to her right, his gaze fixed somewhere just past me, like he couldn't quite meet my eyes. And then, in the far corner of the room, partially obscured by a tall indoor plant, I saw her. The woman from the photograph. Margaret. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, pulled back simply. She wore a dark dress, nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. But she wasn't looking at anyone else in the room. She was looking directly at me. And there was something in her expression I couldn't quite place. No pity. Not judgment. Something else. Something steady. Like she already knew how this was going to unfold. My mother's voice cut through the silence. "Claire," she said smoothly, gesturing toward the empty chair. "Sit. We've been waiting for you." My legs felt heavy as I stepped into the room. Every pair of eyes followed me. Every movement. Every breath. The air felt thicker with each step, like I was walking into something I couldn't step back out of. This wasn't dinner. It wasn't even a conversation. It was something else entirely. And deep down, I think I already knew. I just hadn't said it out loud yet. I reached the chair. And the moment I sat down, my father picked up his glass and tapped it lightly with his fork. The sharp, clear sound cut through the room. And just like that, whatever this was, it began. The sound of the fork against the glass echoed longer than it should have, sharp and deliberate, like a signal that something formal was about to begin. Conversations that hadn't even started were already silenced. Every eye shifted from me to my father as he stood, adjusting his jacket with the same composed precision he used before delivering difficult news at work. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room, controlled and practiced. "We know many of you traveled a long way to be here, and we appreciate your presence." I felt my fingers curl slightly against my lap. This wasn't how birthday dinners started. There was no warmth in his tone, no trace of celebration. Just formality. Distance. "We've gathered here," he continued, pausing just long enough to let the words settle, "to address an important family matter." There it was. Not a celebration. A family matter. My stomach dropped. A faint murmur rippled through the room, but it died almost instantly as my father's gaze swept across the table, silencing it without effort. He had always been good at that. Controlling a room without raising his voice. "As many of you know," he said, "our daughter Claire has made a series of decisions over the past several years that have raised concerns." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Decisions. Concerns. He wasn't even looking at me anymore. He was addressing them. The audience. "Instead of pursuing a stable, respectable career," he continued, "she chose to open a small bakery. A decision we supported, despite our reservations." Supported. I almost laughed. The word felt hollow, stretched thin over years of quiet disapproval and subtle digs that never quite crossed the line into something I could openly call out. "But more recently," he said, his tone tightening just slightly, "Claire has refused to act in the best interest of this family." The murmurs came back, louder this time. Curious. Judgmental. I could feel it building, the shift in the room, the slow turning of opinion before anyone had even heard my side. My mother stood then, placing a gentle hand on his arm like she was stepping in to soften what he had just said. But I knew her too well. This wasn't softness. It was choreography. "We've tried everything," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound emotional, to sound sincere. "We've offered guidance, support, and understanding. But Claire has made it clear that she values her own desires over the needs of her family." A few heads nodded around the table. Agreement. Validation. I felt my throat tighten. "This isn't easy for us," she continued, dabbing lightly at the corner of her eye with a folded napkin. "No parent wants to admit that they've lost their child in this way." Lost. The word hit harder than I expected. I hadn't gone anywhere. I was right here. Sitting in front of them. Breathing. Listening. And yet somehow, in their version of the story, I was already gone. My father stepped forward again, reclaiming the attention of the room. "So tonight," he said, his voice steady, final, we are making a formal decision. The air in the room shifted. Even the faint background noise from the restaurant outside seemed to disappear. We are disowning Claire Morgan as a member of this family. The words didn't register at first. They just hung there. Heavy. Unreal. Then the reaction came. Gasps. Whispered comments. Someone shifting uncomfortably in their chair. I heard my name spoken in hushed tones, like it was something fragile, something shameful. I didn't move. I couldn't. It felt like my body had gone completely still, like if I moved even an inch, the entire moment would shatter and collapse into something I couldn't control. My mother reached into her purse then, her movements calm, unhurried, like this was just another item on an agenda she'd already finalized. She placed a folded document in front of me. The sound it made against the table was soft. But it felt louder than anything else in the room. Sign this, she said quietly, leaning in just enough so only I could hear the edge beneath her tone. And we can handle this with dignity. My hands didn't move, but my eyes dropped to the paper. Legal letterhead. Paragraphs of dense text. And at the bottom, my name. Typed neatly above a blank line. I scanned it quickly, my mind struggling to keep up with what I was reading. Voluntary relinquishment of property rights. The lake house. Everything snapped into place so suddenly it almost made me dizzy. This was never about my birthday. This wasn't even about disowning me. This was about the house. It had always been about the house. The dinner. The family. The speeches. The performance. All of it was built around one goal. Get me to sign. My breath came out slower this time, steadier, even as my heart raced. You planned this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother's smile didn't falter. We planned an intervention, she corrected smoothly. For your own good. I let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it. 51 people, I said, my eyes lifting just enough to glance around the room. You brought 51 people to watch me sign a piece of paper. Witnesses, she said simply. It's important for everyone to understand that this was your decision. My gaze shifted toward the far side of the room. And that's when I noticed him. A man in a dark suit, standing near the wall, holding a leather folder in one hand. He wasn't family. He wasn't a guest. He was watching. Waiting. The family lawyer. Of course. Everything had been arranged. Everything was ready. All they needed was my signature. My mother leaned closer, her voice dropping just enough to feel personal again, even though I knew it wasn't. Claire, she said softly, this doesn't have to be difficult. You sign, we move forward, and you can still walk away from this with some dignity intact. Dignity. The word twisted in my chest. There was nothing dignified about this. About being put on display. About being cornered in front of 51 people and told to give up the one thing that had ever truly belonged to me. The room was watching. Waiting. I could feel it. Some of them looked uncomfortable. Some looked curious. Some looked like they had already decided I was the problem. The black sheep. The difficult one. The selfish one. My fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the paper. I didn't pick up the pen. Not yet. Instead, I looked up. Not my parents. Not at Daniel. In the room. 51 people who had been invited here under the assumption that they were witnessing something necessary. Something justified. And then. My gaze found her again. Margaret. She hadn't moved from her seat in the corner. But her eyes were still on me. Steady. Unwavering. And this time, I noticed something else. Her hand rested on a leather bag sitting in her lap. A bag that looked full. Stuffed with something. Papers. Documents. Something important. Something prepared. My mother followed my gaze, just for a split second. And for the first time that night, I saw it. A flicker. A crack in her control. Fear. It disappeared almost instantly, replaced by that same composed expression she always wore. But it had been there. And I had seen it. Claire, my father said, his voice sharper now, impatience creeping in. We're all waiting. I looked back down at the paper. At my name. At the blank line. At the pen sitting just inches away. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I placed my hand over the document. And slowly pushed it away. Not dramatically. Not forcefully. Just enough to create space between me and it. I need a moment, I said. My mother's smile tightened, just slightly. Of course, she replied, though there was nothing generous about it. The room shifted again. Whispers. Glances. The tension stretched thinner. But beneath it, something else was building. Something I hadn't expected when I walked in. Not panic. Not fear. Something quieter. Stronger. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was thinking. And somewhere deep inside me, a memory surfaced. My grandmother's voice. Soft, steady, certain. You don't need their approval to be worthy. My fingers brushed against my purse, feeling the folded letter inside. The truth. She had said she left me more than the house. And now, I was starting to understand what she meant. I lifted my head slowly. My eyes moved across the room one more time. The audience they had gathered. The stage they had built. The story they thought they were controlling. And then I looked at the microphone stand sitting just a few feet away from my father's seat. They had planned every detail. Every word. Every outcome. But they had made one mistake. They gave me a voice. And I was finally ready to use it. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips as I looked at that microphone. It stood there like it had been waiting for me all along, polished and still, positioned perfectly beside my father as if only one voice in this room had ever been meant to use it. His voice. Their version of the story. Their carefully constructed narrative. But something had shifted. The pressure, the stares, the weight of 51 people watching me like I was on trial, it was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It was sharpening me. I'd like to say something, I said, my voice steady enough that it surprised even me. My mother let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Claire, this isn't. If this isn't a performance, I cut in, glancing deliberately at the microphone, then why is that there? A ripple moved through the room. Subtle, but undeniable. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes narrowed just slightly. They hadn't expected that. They hadn't expected me to push back. I think it's only fair, I continued, rising slowly from my chair, that if you've brought everyone here to witness this, they should hear both sides. Silence fell again, heavier this time. My mother studied me for a long moment, calculating, adjusting, trying to regain control of something that was starting to slip. Then, with a small, tight smile, she gestured toward the microphone. Of course, she said smoothly. If you feel the need to explain yourself. Explain yourself. The way she said it made it sound like I was about to confess something. I stepped forward anyway. Each step felt deliberate. Grounded. Like I was walking into something I had spent years avoiding. My father shifted slightly, as if he might stop me, but he didn't. Not yet. Maybe he still thought this could be contained. I reached the microphone. For a second, I just stood there, looking out at the room. 51 faces. Some curious. Some uncomfortable. Some already judging. And then there was Margaret. Still watching. Still steady. Still waiting. I wrapped my hand around the microphone, the cool metal grounding me in a way nothing else had that night. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying farther than I expected. "I know many of you were told this was a family dinner. Or a celebration." A few people shifted in their seats. Exchanged glances. "Yes," I continued, "that's what I thought too." A quiet murmur moved through the room. I let it settle before going on. "But as you've just heard, this isn't a birthday dinner," I said. "It's an intervention. At least, that's what my parents are calling it." I glanced briefly at them. My mother's smile hadn't dropped, but it had tightened. My father was watching me carefully now. Measuring. Waiting. I turned back to the room. "What it actually is," I said slowly, "is a setup." The word landed heavier than anything else I had said so far. A few people straightened in their chairs. My mother took a small step forward. "Claire. They want me to sign a document tonight," I continued, speaking over her just enough to keep control of the moment. "A legal document that transfers ownership of my grandmother's lake house to them." Now the murmurs grew louder. Confusion. Surprise. A shift in the narrative. "They've brought a lawyer," I added, gesturing lightly toward the man in the suit near the wall, who suddenly looked very aware of how visible he was. "They've arranged witnesses. They've planned this entire evening down to the smallest detail." I paused, letting it sink in. "And if I refuse," I said, my voice quieter now but somehow stronger, "they've decided to disown me. Publicly. In front of all of you." The room went still again. Not the controlled silence from before. This one felt different. Uncertain. Uncomfortable. Real. "That's not true," my mother said quickly, her voice cutting in, sharp but still controlled. "We are trying to help you make the right decision." "The right decision," I repeated, turning to look at her fully now. "Or your decision." A flicker of something crossed her face again. Faster this time. Anger. But she smoothed it over just as quickly. "You're being emotional," she said, her tone softening again, turning back toward the audience. "This is exactly what we were concerned about. Claire has always struggled with." "With what?" I asked, cutting her off again, not raising my voice, but not backing down either. The room leaned in. "Waiting. With making responsible choices," she finished, pivoting smoothly. "With understanding what it means to be part of a family." A few nods. Familiar territory for her. She was trying to regain control. Reframe the story. I could see it happening in real time. And for a moment, I felt that old pull. That old instinct to shrink. To second guess. To wonder if maybe she was right. But then my fingers brushed against the folded letter still in my hand. And everything snapped back into place. "No," I said quietly. The word wasn't loud. But it carried. Clear. Final. "I think what I've struggled with," I continued, turning back to the room, "is understanding why being part of this family has always meant giving up pieces of myself to make everyone else comfortable." No one spoke. No one interrupted. Even my mother stayed still. Because now, they were listening. "My grandmother didn't see things that way," I said, my voice softening just slightly. "She believed that family should make you feel safe. Supported. Seen." A few expressions shifted. Recognition. Memory. "She left me that house because it mattered to me," I went on. "Because it was the one place where I felt like I could actually be myself." I paused again. Took a breath. "And before she passed, she left me something else too." My mother's posture stiffened. It was subtle. But I saw it. I lifted the letter slightly, not unfolding it yet. "A letter," I said. "One that I hadn't read until last night." The room felt like it tilted just a little. Something had changed. The balance. The control. My mother took a step forward, her voice dropping, sharper now. Claire, this is not the time. I think it is, I said, meeting her gaze. For a moment, neither of us moved. And then I looked back at the room. At all of you, I added. 51 witnesses. Just like she wanted. Just not in the way she planned. My grandmother knew this might happen, I said. She knew there might come a moment where I'd be pressured, or manipulated, into giving up what she left me. The whispers started again. But this time, they weren't about me. They were about her. My mother. And she told me something important, I continued, my voice steady despite the way my heart was pounding. I unfolded the letter slowly. The paper made a soft sound in the quiet room. And for the first time that night, my mother looked nervous. Not controlled. Not composed. Nervous. Because whatever was about to happen next, she couldn't control it anymore. The paper felt fragile in my hands, like it carried more weight than something so thin should be able to hold. For a brief second, I hesitated, my eyes scanning the first few lines again, even though I already knew what they said. Not because I needed to reread them, but because I understood what would happen once I spoke them out loud. There would be no going back. Not after this. I lifted my head and looked out at the room. 51 people who had been invited here to witness my humiliation. Now they were about to witness something else entirely. My grandmother wrote this for me, I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was still racing. But I think it's something all of you need to hear. My mother took a sharp step forward. Claire, don't. I didn't stop. My dearest Claire, I began, reading clearly, letting each word land. The room fell completely silent. If you're reading this at a family gathering, then things have gone exactly as I feared. A ripple moved through the room. Small, but noticeable. I kept going. Your mother has always believed that love is something to be controlled. That people can be shaped, pressured, or worn down until they give in. A few heads turned. Subtle. Careful. But the shift had started. I glanced up just briefly. My mother's face had gone still. Too still. 10 years ago, I continued, she tried to convince me to sell the lake house. When I refused, she distanced herself. Not out of hurt, but because she couldn't control the outcome. A quiet gasp came from somewhere near the middle of the table. I didn't look to see who it was. I didn't break the flow. I know she will try again, I rayed, my voice gaining strength with every word. And when she does, she will not come alone. She will use family. She will use guilt. She will make you feel like the problem. The room wasn't just silent anymore. It was listening. Really listening. And I could feel it. That shift. That slow unraveling of everything my parents had built. You are not the problem, I read, my voice softening slightly. And you are not selfish for holding on to something that matters to you. My hands steadied. My breathing evened out. Because now, I wasn't just reading anymore. I was standing in it. Believing it. And if she tries to take this from you, I continued, know this, you are stronger than she believes you are. I lowered the paper just slightly. Just enough to look at my mother. Her composure was cracking. Barely. But it was there. And I've left you something else, I finished, lifting the letter again. Something she doesn't know about. The room leaned in. Waiting. Look for Margaret, I read. She is the only one who knows the full truth. She has been waiting a long time to tell it. The moment the name left my mouth, the entire room shifted. Confusion. Whispers. Margaret, someone repeated quietly. Who's Margaret? I lowered the letter slowly. And then I turned. Toward the corner. Toward her. Margaret stood. The movement was calm. Unhurried. But it cut through the tension in the room like a blade. Every head turned. Every eye followed her as she stepped forward, moving out from the shadows she'd been sitting in all night. She didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. She just walked. And the closer she got, the more the room seemed to part around her without anyone consciously deciding to move. "Hello, Susan," she said. My mother flinched. Actually flinched. It was small. But undeniable. The room caught it. And that was all it took. "You have no right to be here," my mother snapped, her voice sharper now, the controls slipping faster. "You were cut out of this family years ago." Margaret stopped a few feet from the table. Her expression didn't change. "If by cut out, you mean I threatened to tell the truth," she said evenly, "then yes. That's exactly what happened." The room erupted into low, urgent whispers. "Truth? What truth?" My father shifted in his seat, finally stepping in. "Margaret, this is neither the time nor the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the time," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And you know it." He fell silent. That alone told me more than anything else could have. Margaret turned slightly, addressing the room now. 20 years ago," she said, "I discovered that Susan had been siphoning money from our mother's accounts. Small amounts at first. Then larger ones. Enough to go unnoticed unless you were looking closely." The whispers grew louder. Shock. Disbelief. Recognition. "That's a lie," my mother snapped immediately. "She's always been unstable. Always looking for attention." Margaret didn't react. Didn't raise her voice. Didn't defend herself emotionally. She didn't need to. "Is that what you told everyone?" she asked calmly. "That I was unstable?" My mother's silence was louder than any answer. Margaret nodded once, like she already knew. "That's what you told me too," she continued, her voice quieter now, but somehow even more cutting. "Right before you convinced everyone I was the problem. That I needed help. That I couldn't be trusted." I felt a chill run through me. Because it sounded familiar. Too familiar. The same pattern. The same playbook. "She isolated our mother," Margaret went on. "Controlled who she spoke to. What she knew. What she signed." "That's enough," my father said sharply, standing now. But his voice didn't carry the same authority it had earlier. "Not anymore." Margaret turned to him. "Did you know?" she asked. He didn't answer. Didn't even try. And that silence said everything. Margaret reached into her bag. The same bag I had noticed earlier. The one that had looked too full. She pulled out her phone. "And before anyone asks," she said, glancing briefly around the room, "yes, I have proof." The words landed like a weight. Proof. Real. Tangible. Something that couldn't be explained away. My mother's face had gone pale now. Not controlled. Not composed. Pale. "Margaret," she said, her voice lower, tighter, "whatever you think you have." "It's not what I think," Margaret replied. "It's what you said." And then she pressed play. The room filled with sound. Clear. Unmistakable. My mother's voice. "We'll do it at her birthday dinner. Maximum pressure. Maximum witnesses." My chest tightened. I could feel every single person in that room react at the same time. The shift wasn't subtle anymore. It was immediate. And irreversible. "And if she refuses?" my father's voice followed. "She won't," my mother answered, calm, confident. "She never does. One public push and she'll fold." The recording continued. Every word. Every plan. Laid out in detail. Daniel's voice joined in briefly, asking what would happen if I made a scene. Let her, my mother said, almost amused. It only makes it easier to paint her as unstable. A sharp inhale rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Margaret paused the recording. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. This one was heavy. Thick. Cracking under the weight of what everyone had just heard. "That's just a portion," Margaret said quietly. "There's more." No one spoke. No one moved. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to spin. The truth had already landed. And this time, there were 51 witnesses to it. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy in a way that pressed down on the entire room, like the air itself had thickened. No one reached for their glasses. No one shifted in their seats. Even the faint background music from the restaurant outside seemed to have disappeared. Every single person was looking at my parents. Not at me anymore. Not at the problem. At them. Margaret lowered her phone slowly, her expression unchanged, as if she had already lived through this moment 100 times in her mind and was simply watching it unfold the way she always knew it would. My mother was the first to move. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice sharp, but there was something underneath it now. Not control. Not confidence. Desperation. "This recording was taken without my consent," she continued quickly, looking around the room, grasping for something to hold on to. "It's not even admissible. It doesn't prove anything." "It proves everything," Margaret said calmly. My father stepped forward then, his movements stiff, controlled in a way that looked more forced than natural now. "Margaret," he said, lowering his voice as if trying to contain the situation, "whatever grievances you think you have, this is not the appropriate place to air them." "Grievances?" Margaret repeated, tilting her head slightly. "You think this is about grievances?" She took a step closer. "This is about a pattern," she said. "A pattern of manipulation, control, and rewriting reality so thoroughly that everyone else starts to question what they've seen with their own eyes." A murmur spread through the room again. But this time, it wasn't uncertain. It was understanding. Recognition. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. My mother's gaze snapped toward me, sharp and accusing, like somehow this was still my fault. "You did this," she said, her voice low and tight. "You brought her here." I almost laughed. The idea that I had orchestrated any of this, that I had somehow outmaneuvered her, was so far from the truth it didn't even make sense. "I didn't even know she existed until last night," I said evenly. That landed harder than I expected. Because it meant something simple. She had erased her. Completely. "Of course you didn't," Margaret said quietly, glancing at me for just a moment before looking back at my mother. "That was the point, wasn't it?" My mother didn't respond. Because there was no good answer to that. And for the first time in my life, she didn't have one. Uncle Robert, who had been sitting halfway down the table, slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. The sound of the legs scraping against the floor cut through the silence like a line being drawn. "Susan," he said, his voice heavier than I'd ever heard it, "is this true?" My mother turned to him quickly. "Of course it's not. You know how she is. She's always twisted things." "We all heard it," he interrupted. That stopped her. Completely. Not because he raised his voice. But because he didn't. He just stated it. Plain. Undeniable. "We heard you planning this," he continued. "Planning to humiliate your own daughter to get what you wanted." Aunt Melissa stood beside him, crossing her arms. "You told us this was a family dinner. You didn't say anything about legal documents. Or lawyers. Or this." She gestured vaguely toward the table, toward the paper still sitting in front of me. Toward everything. The cracks were spreading now. Fast. "I was trying to protect this family," my mother insisted, her voice rising slightly, losing that polished edge it had held all night. Claire doesn't understand what responsibility looks like. She doesn't think long-term. Someone has to make the hard decisions. For yourself, someone muttered. I didn't even see who said it. But the effect was immediate. The room shifted again. This time, it wasn't just doubt. It was distance. People leaning back instead of forward. People pulling away instead of closing in. My father looked around, taking in the room, the change in energy, the way control had slipped entirely out of his hands. And then he did something I hadn't expected. Nothing. He didn't defend her. Didn't step in. Didn't try to take control back. He just stood there. Silent. Watching everything fall apart. Daniel finally spoke, his voice tight, strained. This is getting out of hand. We didn't come here to. To what? Margaret asked, cutting him off. To pressure your sister into giving up something that was never yours? His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because for the first time, the justification didn't sound reasonable anymore. It sounded exactly like what it was. Greed. The room started to move. Subtly at first. A chair sliding back here. A napkin being set down there. People shifting, exchanging looks, quietly deciding where they stood now that the truth had been laid out in front of them. And one by one, they started to stand. I can't be part of this, Aunt Melissa said quietly. Uncle Robert nodded. Neither can I. Others followed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But steadily. A slow, undeniable exodus. People gathering their coats. Avoiding my mother's gaze. Avoiding my father's. Because staying now meant choosing a side. And for the first time, that choice wasn't automatic. Where are you all going? My mother demanded, her voice cracking now, the control gone completely. We're not finished here. But they were. You could feel it. The moment had passed. The narrative had collapsed. And no one was interested in helping her rebuild it. I stepped back from the microphone. I didn't need it anymore. The room was already listening. I looked at my parents. Really looked at them. At my mother, who had built her entire identity on control, now standing in the middle of a room that was slipping out of her grasp. At my father, who had always chosen silence over confrontation, now watching the consequences of that silence unfold in real time. At Daniel, who looked less confident than I had ever seen him, like the certainty he'd carried into this room had been quietly stripped away. And then I spoke. Mom. Dad. My voice wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. They both looked at me. Finally. Not as a problem. Not as something to fix. But as someone standing in front of them. I think you said earlier that you were disowning me, I continued. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. Consider it done, I said calmly. That landed. Clean. Final. But not the way you planned, I added. I glanced down briefly at the documents still sitting on the table. Then back at them. I'm not signing anything, I said. Not tonight. Not ever. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just truth. The lake house is mine, I continued. Grandma made that clear. And if you decide to challenge that, just remember. I gestured lightly around the room. Everyone here just witnessed exactly how you tried to get it. My father's expression shifted slightly at that. Because he understood what that meant. Legally. Socially. Reputationally. And one more thing, I said. I took a breath. Let it settle. I didn't embarrass this family tonight, I said quietly. I just stopped protecting it. The silence that followed was different. Not heavy. Not tense. Clear. Like something had finally been said that had been waiting for years. I stepped away from the table. No one stopped me. No one tried. Because there was nothing left to argue. Nothing left to control. I walked toward the door. Each step felt lighter than the last. And for the first time since I had walked into that room, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally walking out of it. The door to the alder room closed behind me with a soft, almost polite click, like it didn't want to disturb what had just happened inside. But the moment I stepped out into the night air, everything hit me at once, the adrenaline, the disbelief, the release I hadn't even realized I'd been holding back. The city felt different. Cooler. Quieter. Real. I stood there on the sidewalk for a second, my hands still slightly trembling, my heart pounding in a way that didn't feel like panic anymore. It felt like something breaking loose. Like something finally letting go. For 30 years, I had been trying to fit into a space that was never made for me. Trying to earn something that was always conditional. Trying to prove I was enough to people who had already decided I wasn't. And just like that, it was over. Claire, wait. I turned at the sound of my name. 3 figures pushed through the restaurant doors behind me, the warm light spilling out briefly before the door swung shut again. Emily. Jake. And Sophie. My younger cousins. Emily reached me first, slightly out of breath. Are you okay? I blinked, caught off guard by the question. No one had asked me that in a long time. I think so, I said honestly. Jake let out a low breath, running a hand through his hair. That was insane. I mean, I knew things were tense, but not like that. Sophie nodded quickly. We had no idea what this actually was. If we did, we wouldn't have. I know, I said gently, cutting her off before she could finish. And I meant it. Because I could see it now. They weren't part of the plan. They had been pulled into it just like everyone else. Can we come with you? Emily asked, her voice a little hesitant now. We don't really want to stay in there. I glanced back at the restaurant. Through the glass, I could still see movement. Raised voices. People standing. My mother's silhouette, pacing, trying to pull something back together that was already gone. Then I looked back at them. At the uncertainty in their faces. At the choice they were making right now. Yeah, I said, a small smile breaking through despite everything. Yeah, you can. Jake let out a relieved breath. Good. Because I definitely need something stronger than whatever that was. Sophie laughed softly, the tension easing just a little. There's a diner down the street. Open late. Perfect, I said. And just like that, we walked away. Not alone. Not broken. Just different. The diner was quiet, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and something sweet lingering in the air. We slid into a booth, the vinyl seats creaking slightly, menus already sitting in front of us like they had been waiting. For the first few minutes, no one said much. Not because we didn't have anything to say, but because there was too much. Finally, Jake leaned back, shaking his head. I still can't believe they actually planned all that. Like, the lawyer? The witnesses? That's not normal. No, I said quietly. It's not. Emily looked at me carefully. Did you know it was going to be like that? I thought about the call. The texts. The warning message. The letter. I had a feeling, I admitted. Just not that exact version of it. Sophie frowned slightly. And that woman? Margaret? She's really your aunt? I nodded. Apparently, I said, still adjusting to the reality of that myself. She was incredible, Emily said softly. The way she just stood there and told the truth like that. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. Yeah, I said. She was. We ordered coffee. Pie. Something simple. Something normal. And for the first time that night, I felt normal. Not like a problem. Not like a disappointment. Just like a person sitting in a booth, talking to people who actually wanted to be there. Later that night, after we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, I drove home alone. The apartment felt quiet when I stepped inside. But not empty. Just still. I kicked off my shoes, set my keys down on the counter, and sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the navy dress. And then it hit me. All of it. The years. The pressure. The constant feeling of not being enough. It came out all at once. Not neat. Not controlled. Messy. Raw. Real. I cried harder than I had in years. Not just for what had happened that night, but for everything that had led up to it. Everything I had held in. Everything I had tried to fix. Everything I had tried to be. And when it finally stopped, I felt lighter. Not fixed. Not completely healed. But freer. The fallout came quickly. Within a week, word had spread through the family faster than I could have expected. Not the version my parents would have preferred, but the truth. The recording. The setup. The dinner that had turned into something no one could ignore. Emily called me a few days later. "You won't believe this," she said, barely containing her excitement. "Uncle Robert pulled his investment from Daniel's business deal. Said he couldn't trust anything after what happened." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that. "That's big," I said. "It gets better," she continued. "Aunt Melissa isn't speaking to your mom at all. And a couple of her friends from church? They heard about everything. Let's just say she's not exactly being invited to things anymore." I didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. But I felt clarity. Actions had consequences. And for once, they weren't mine to carry. A week after that, Daniel called. I stared at his name on my phone for a long time before answering. "You really went all out, didn't you?" he said, his voice tight. "You couldn't just handle this privately?" I let out a slow breath. "You mean like you handled it privately?" Silence. "Then, you didn't have to humiliate them like that." "I didn't humiliate anyone," I said calmly. "I told the truth." "There's a difference." Another pause. "You could have helped," he muttered. "You still could." There it was. Still about the house. Still about what they wanted. "No," I said simply. "I couldn't." He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "I can't believe you're doing this to the family." "I'm not doing anything to the family," I replied. "I'm just not letting the family do it to me anymore." He didn't have a response to that. He hung up shortly after. And that was the last time we spoke. A few days later, I met Margaret for coffee. In daylight, she looked different. Softer. Less like a secret waiting in the corner and more like someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time. "I'm sorry it had to happen like that," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "I'm not," I said honestly. She studied me for a moment. Then smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," she said. Something in my chest warmed at that. "I think she knew this was coming," I said. Margaret nodded. "She always did." We talked for a while after that. About the past. About what had really happened. About everything that had been hidden. And for the first time, I felt like I understood my family. Not the version I had been told. The real one. A month later, I stood on the deck of the lake house, watching the sun dip low over the water. The same place. The same view. But everything felt different. Lighter. Quieter. Mine. I had started bringing supplies out here on weekends. Baking again. Teaching a few small classes. Nothing big. Nothing complicated. Just something real. Emily had come by once. Sophie too. Even Jake, though he pretended it was just for the food. Margaret visited every Sunday. It wasn't the family I had grown up with. But it was a family. One I chose. One that chose me back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. Unknown number. For a second, my chest tightened. Then I opened it. No message. Just silence. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I turned it off. Set it down. And looked back out at the water. Whatever was behind me could stay there. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for approval. I wasn't trying to earn a place. I already had one. Right here. So that's my story. On my 30th birthday, my parents tried to disown me in front of 51 people. They thought pressure would break me. They thought shame would make me smaller. They were wrong. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt like you had to shrink yourself just to be accepted, go ahead and subscribe to Women Reddit Stories so you don't miss what comes next. And type boundaries in the comments if you understand this lesson, because it's the most important one I learned. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose yourself. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is stop asking for permission to exist. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next story.